Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode 8 of the Thought Adventure podcast. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Probably should have started with that and then moved on to the salams. How is everyone? You all good?
Good.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Good, man. Good.
Alhamdulillah. So, the topic of today's podcast is going to be Theism versus Deism. That is so we can jump straight into that, but there has also been some other topics hot on the press recently. For example, the recent discussion you guys had with Aaron Ra. So should we begin, I think, maybe making a few comments on that stream before we jump straight into the topic of Deism? Or do you want to jump straight into the Deism topic?
Sure.
What do you reckon?
No, we can come on first.
Yeah, we can talk about Aaron Ra. Yusuf, you weren't there, so what did you think to it?
So I've not managed to watch it all yet. I watched the first, I think, half an hour, and then I was on my way out. So I was getting on buses and moving about, and so I was dipping in and out while trying to talk to a few people. I didn't have high hopes. I'll be honest, at the beginning. Well, even prior to the conversation, I didn't really have high hopes that it was going to be a fruitful discussion. And in the first part of the conversation, I was getting the feeling that it was moving in that direction, especially when it got to the point where he started getting angry, very unreasonably so. Like there was hardly anything that I thought you guys were being quite polite. The conversation was going nicely. And then he jumped to this. You've been. And you could see when you were getting into the meat and potatoes of the subject, his eyes were sort of glazing over. When it moved towards the philosophical side of it, it was going over his head. And then it came across to me like he sort of moved to this, I guess, defense mechanism where he started saying, you've misrepresented me. You've misrepresented me. I've told you exactly how you've misrepresented me several times, blah, 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 blah. And then Abdulrahman said, sorry, that's not what I want to do. Can you please tell me where I've misrepresented you? And if I've done that, obviously I'll retract my comment. I don't want that to be the case. I want this to be a fruitful conversation. And then he didn't even know what he was being misrepresented on. And it was like, well, if you were so sure you're being misrepresented, because he was very confident he was being misrepresented. It's not like you said to him half an hour later, oh, by the way, what was it you misrepresented? Like it was following on from his claim that he was being misrepresented. You would think that the first thing that would have come from that is the exact thing, which was the misrepresentation. But he was like, no, I don't take notes. So you just made the claim 2 seconds ago. You don't need to refer to no book. And so I lost heart at that moment. It was like, this is going to go downhill. And then I had to leave and obviously do my stuff. And then apparently it got much better towards the end.
So I think one thing is that line that he brought up about misrepresentation, apparently that's a script that he uses in debates. So he'll bring that out as a script. It's like a pre-prepared sort of statement that he utilizes. So there's So I think, because if you re-listen to what he says, it is literally like a script, yeah. And he's mentioning points which have no relation to what Abdulrahman was even saying, yeah, which was quite unusual.
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying, because you get this air of him not really following the conversation. And when it came to like, well, what is it that you're calling evidence here exactly? And then there was a bit where Brother Jake was like, that the necessary existence bit, and he's like, but that's necessary existence. And he's like, no, it's just that it couldn't be any other way. Yeah. It's like, yeah, that's the definition of the necessary. And and then he just said no, and then repeated the same thing again. It's like, dude, that's what necessary means. That it can't be any other way. It's necessary. And he was just throwing sort of the definition of necessary while following it up with like a no. That isn't what I'm saying. And it's like, oh, bro. So yeah, it was a bit frustrating to watch. Like I say, I was sort of running around and struggling to really focus on everything that was going to say. I do plan on doing maybe a sit down on my channel where I'll watch through it. I don't know if I'll do that on my own, or maybe I'll try and get someone to jump on it with me. I was seeing if I could get Brother Sabor on, but he's really busy at the moment with 1 million live streams.
You get Asadullah if you can do.
Yeah, inshallah.
That'd be good, man. Debate review.
Yeah, man. So I'll try to reach out to a few people and see if I can get someone on there with us, and we'll go through it. But I'm in two minds about whether I should watch it again first. How long was he on for?
It was only an hour and 5 minutes. So it's not you've only got another half an hour to go. So 40 minutes.
So yeah, I'm in two minds about whether I should watch it before I review it, or just do like a fresh review and get my live reaction, pure, unadulterated.
I think you need to watch it before you review it, because there are a lot of subtle points that were mentioned in there with the discussion, and I think maybe even people who were watching it live might not have realized, like the law of non-contradiction. On the one hand, he's arguing evidence is based upon observable data, and that if you don't have observable data, you can't believe in something. But yet that he's affirming the law of non-contradiction. Yeah. So this is like an example. Or there was other points where I think Jake towards the end asked him the question about, or sort of made the point, which was about, do you believe in nothing? He goes, no, it's impossible for there to be nothing, therefore it's necessary for there to be something. Yeah, and then he posits a necessary being at the end. Basically energy and matter, yeah. But
looking at a few of his interactions on Twitter as well, though, it did look like he was backtracking from these claims of...
Yeah, he's backtracking.
He backtracked at the end of the video, man. It wasn't.
Well, yeah, because when we pointed out the implication of what he was saying, he was backtracking, and then he wanted, in my opinion, he wanted to leave the stream. But yeah, I've been going back and forth with him a little bit on a Facebook post of a friend of ours, and he's just, in my opinion, he's twisting his own words, what he originally said on the video. I told him, I said, look, you got a couple options. Either admit that you said that in the video and you reject it, you want to retract your statement, that's fine. Or you should say that, you can maintain that you never said it, but everyone can just watch the video, right?
Yeah. Or say he made a mistake when he said it and he didn't. That's not what he meant.
Yeah. But don't act like you didn't say it, dude. You said it, and you either made a mistake or you believed it at that time, but then you thought about it and you said, "Oh, it doesn't really follow, and I shouldn't have said that," or you actually still affirm what you said and you think there's a necessary being, but it's just not God. Those are your options. Don't act as if you didn't say it and, oh, that's not what I meant. I meant something else. Like, dude, it was obvious to everybody watching the video, including other atheists and agnostics, few of which have already done a review on it. And he just looks bad. He just looks like a kid that just lost a game and now he just wants to run home. It doesn't look right. I mean,
wants to take the football home with him. That's what we would say.
Yeah, I mean,
but the thing is that even if he denies a necessary being and he starts to affirm nothingness, absolute nothingness, even as a possibility, he's contradicting himself again, because we talked about the principle of sufficient reason, and we talked about whether something can come from nothing with no reason whatsoever. And he said, no, there has to be a reason. Yeah. So he has to give an, it's like he's dug himself into a pit and he sort of can't get out of it. And no matter which direction that he goes, he just gets deeper and deeper. But that's just my thoughts on it. It was a good discussion, though. I think it was very respectful generally.
Towards the end, it must have been, but not while I was watching it. I wasn't getting that vibe from him. He seemed very condescending, very like he kept interrupting.
Yeah, it was respectful from our end.
Yeah, from his perspective. I mean, if you watch his other stuff, it could have gone a lot worse, dude. Like that that was Aaron Ra on his best behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is what it is. But I mean, look, he's still welcome to come back. I'm happy to have him for round 2 if he wants to come on and clarify what he said on the show. And then based on that, we can, decide where we want to go from there. But, I suspect that he's not going to come back on. I'd be happy for him to do so, but I don't foresee it happening.
Well, we could even do, if he does, because obviously I'm not getting the feeling that he will, but if for whatever reason we're just sort of misjudging here and he's up for it, it'd be cool to maybe even get him on to do like a review of the discussion you had with him and going through it and saying, look, listen, and then playing what he said and then rewinding it. Because I think that's probably the only way you're sort of going to really make clear what was said and what was meant by it. And then obviously at that point we can start to sort of figure out.
That would be cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's somebody in the chat here. Not this one. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong one. Bustin' Jeeber. He didn't like the conversation because he kept asking for a topic besides philosophy, and you guys kept pushing on those philosophical topics.
It was a conversation of philosophy. That was the whole title.
Probably, Mr. Bustin', it's probably because the conversation about God is a philosophical one. I don't think maybe Aaron didn't get the memo, and apparently you didn't get the memo either, but the question about God is a philosophical one. It's not a scientific one. Theists don't believe that you can find God under a microscope.
Yeah,
and so
it's the whole example of the painter in a painting.
Yeah, Aaron Ra needs to understand this. I mean, it's amazing to me how people can be engaging with theists for 20 plus years and having arguments with them. I'm sure within those 20 years, maybe there's some joker that came along and said, yeah, there's this God is in my DNA or something weird like that. But for the most part, nobody really believes this. Nobody says this. So, I mean, why would you be expecting a conversation that wasn't philosophical in nature if it's a question about whether or not a necessary being exists? A necessary being is a metaphysical question. It's not a scientific question.
Yeah. I think also it really frustrates me when people turn around and say, oh, he came in and it was a philosophical debate and he's not very good at that. But he's making philosophical assumptions, claims. Yeah, he's making these claims. He's making claims about how do we know what we know? What's the theory of knowledge? That's called epistemology. So he's saying these are the tools that we use to know certain things. And if we can't know certain things, it means it's outside of these tools. So you have to look at what his epistemology is. And then he's making claims about ontology, basically what is possible, what is impossible. So he's claiming God is impossible. Yeah. Yeah. So this is ontological claims. So his basic arguments fundamentally rest upon his epistemology and how he understands from his epistemology his ontology. It therefore becomes a discussion of what is your epistemology and how is it that you're using that to be consistent in defining what is a logical
and this guy says back, Aaron has mainly discussions with theists about science such as evolution. Correct, but he came on. Look, the title was clear. We told the guy what it was going to be about. We didn't say, hey, we want to discuss Islam and evolution with you. And then all of a sudden, 2 minutes before, we changed the topic. I mean, it's a different subject. We didn't bait him into anything. We invited him on to talk about whether or not a necessary being exists. It's not a scientific question. That's if you're basically, from what I interpret from this statement, is he's not equipped to have this discussion. And he came into discussion and he looked bad. Is that our fault or his? Yeah. I mean, come on.
And Jake, it's a big so what evolution, to be honest. Yeah. In the question of a necessary being and even the question of God, evolution is a big so what because it doesn't affect it has nothing to do with it. Yeah. So he's been spending all these years saying, evolution this, God therefore doesn't exist. It doesn't even logically follow the two things.
So he even mentioned
Boston's got to stop busting us, man. You're not going to bust us, dude. Come on.
But even in the conversation, he said he thinks philosophy is good, that it's just misused. So he's even talking as though he has like somewhat of an understanding and appreciation of philosophy.
Yeah, but I think
in the
that's
discussion,
just,
and then like,
I think he's just saying that. I don't think he actually believes that. I've been told by people that's just an act. He actually hates philosophy.
It's annoying, especially when they're doing philosophy, man. It's so annoying.
I think Bustin Jiba was just simply saying he's not trying to like justify it. He's just simply explaining why he didn't like the conversation.
Yeah, but he's saying why he didn't like the conversation. Was he expecting that it was going to be something different? If not, and he came in and he didn't like the conversation, then I mean, that's really silly. If he didn't like it and didn't want to be there, he shouldn't have accepted to come on the show.
But you know, I've seen maybe obviously I'm not saying about busting there, but I've seen atheists turn around and say, "Oh, was he baited onto the show? Did he not know what the topic was or anything like that?" But the point being is that if you're going to make claims about the theory of knowledge, how do we know what we know? And if you're going to make claims about possible and impossible beings, you're in the realm of philosophy now. You are talking philosophy. Now, if you can't justify your theory of knowledge and you can't justify how it is consistently applied to talk about ontology, then that's not a problem of me or Jake or Abdulrahman. That's his problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah. I mean, it would be like him inviting me for a stream on evolution, and I didn't know anything about evolution, and I went on there and I looked bored and I didn't want to talk to the people. I mean, I would have same criticism of myself. It would be ridiculous.
Also, you were making evolutionary claims as well prior to on the show.
Yeah, and then at the end, I just said, "Oh, I wasn't interested." Sorry.
But anyway,
it
was.
Assalamu alaikum, Atul. You're mute.
Wa alaikum salam. Sorry for being late, guys.
No. We're going to have to
I think we might have to jump into jump into the topic of deism as well.
Yeah.
We could talk about Aaron Ra for a very long. I think inshallah, we might do. Well, let's say inshallah, but we may do a debate review if if people are interested. We go through it line by line, word by word.
I'll give mine first, and then maybe we can do something together after that as well. And
cool.
We'll see how it goes. But so topic of deism. Let's begin with that. So obviously we're making here a distinction between deism and theism. Theism being the claim that there is a God and that this God does provide revelation and cares about his creation and has contact with it and tries to guide it. So does someone, Sharif, I'll throw the ball your way. Do you want to give a brief description of deism in relation to theism?
Yeah, so I think if you want to understand what deism is, the central thread for deism is basically this idea that there isn't special revelation. Yeah, there's different models under deism. So there isn't this idea that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator, sends down revelation to certain people in order to guide people specifically how to live their life, through maybe a book or etc. Yeah, so that's generally the thread. So this idea of this creator that intervenes on how people should live their lives. Now, under that, there are different models. So one of the models is this this idea that a creator doesn't have a will or intelligence. They're just literally a necessary being, a necessary existence foundation that has no intentionality in terms of creating. So that's one model of deism. Another model of deism is basically saying that this creator has will and intentionality. He created the universe and then just left it to operate according to these laws, and then just step back. Yeah, so that's another one. A third perspective on deism is that God created the universe, but simply just didn't send anybody any revelation. Yeah, so yes, he may uphold the laws of the universe, but he just didn't bother with sending any revelation to human beings to how to live their life. And so these are the different aspects of what deism is. So I don't know if you want to go into maybe why they've sort of adopted these positions, but ultimately the creator exists. They've come to that conclusion rationally. but they're saying there's no special revelation that's intervening. Yeah, there's no interaction or intervention from the creator.
Well, there's a number of reasons I can think as to why they would maybe try to move down this route. So one would be controversial subject matters they wish to avoid that necessarily come tied with particular religious thinking. So, like, for example, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, the Hadith. And they just want to avoid sort of having to have these conversations, or they want to avoid the strict rules maybe that come along with certain religions. So that could be one possible motivation. The other could maybe even be the problem of evil. So like they're convinced, they look at the world and they see, you know, that they're compelled by the beauty of existence, by, you know, the presence of what looks to be the influence of a wise being in the world, and you know, fine tuning, etc. All of these sort of typical arguments you hear in favor of a creator. They're convinced by them, but you know, it's sort of accompanied with the problem of evil. So it's like, well, why would evil exist? Why is it that these bad things exist? Surely whatever created this mustn't care about us. That sort of reasoning. I don't know. Can anyone think of any other sort of additional sort of motivating factors that might lead to deism? Abdulrahman, Jake, do you want to jump in there?
I think, and I could be wrong, but I think one of the main reasons for at least the intellectual side of why these people believe in deism is because they have this idea that God, who's the creator, he can't really interact with creation. There seems to be this notion that the supernatural, there are no really supernatural things like miracles, or even revelation would be an example of God interacting with the world. I think that's, and I could be wrong, but that seems to me to be the common thread between the different forms of deism. They just, either they can't make sense of it, or they think it's a contradiction. I think that, to me, is what the main issue is with deism. And I think that we've covered on a previous stream about miracles why that isn't really a good reason to affirm deism and reject a sort of classical view of theism, because the idea that miracles are impossible, which David Hume kind of put forth this, and he was very influential, I think, on the deist movement. I think we did a good job of explaining why that's not really a good reason to reject theism. You know, the idea that miracles are somehow logically incompatible with the natural world is just not correct. It's a misnomer. So I think that their motivation with things like miracles and even revelation, special revelation would be an example to me that would fall under this category of a miracle, because it's sort of a supernatural event. So, and there's an example from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life, in which, you know, Abu Bakr, I think, was being asked about the night journey that the Prophet went on, and people, you know, thought it was like a strange thing. They were asking, well, how do you believe in this? And he said, well, I believe in something greater than that. I believe that God is actually speaking to the Prophet and sends him revelation. So the reason why I bring that up is because it's related in that sense. I mean, if you can ground or make sense and believe in things like revelation, then miracles, I mean, they're really nothing. What's the big deal about a specific miracle? So I think that the common thread is this idea of supernatural things and God sort of interacting with creation. But there are some deists who even believe in God's general conservation of the natural world, that somehow he's conserving and upholding the natural world. And I think that's a form of intervention, because without that, it wouldn't really operate the way that it does and wouldn't be sustained. And so I think there's in some forms of deism where they accept that there's an inconsistency. Well, if you accept that, which is God's causal activity in the natural world, then what's the difference about a miracle or special revelation? So I think that's a fundamental, incoherency in their own worldview. But yeah, I don't know what you guys think about it.
Yeah, no, that's probably definitely another element to it. There's another comment here by Valerian, the Black Dread. There might be one more reason. They see that there is no evidence for God contacting with us.
Yeah, that is a potential argument that some of them, some deists try to use. I think but I just wanted to focus on this point about the motivating factor. I think, looking at the historical development, certainly of the recent quote unquote, in the last couple of 100 years of deism, deism rose in Europe, particularly in Britain, during what we term sort of on the cusp of the Enlightenment period, so the 17th, 18th century, during this period of time. And this was a period where people were moving away from religion generally. They saw the problems within Christianity, especially within the political realm, how it's being applied. They started to argue more and more for human beings to have more autonomy, not to be controlled by the church, or have the church being involved in the state apparatus. And so you have a movement, a political movement, and within this political movement came an intellectual movement, which was deism, which was basically arguing on the same premise or with the same implications, with this idea that if God doesn't provide special revelation, or you don't really need special revelation, you can live your own life and you can be good as a result. God has given you that capacity to be good. You don't need God intervening in your life. Therefore, the creator God is just some sort of deistic creator, exists, doesn't interact. So this is what was occurring within the 17th, 18th century, which was these various political, moral philosophers that were coming about, many of whom were either deistic or atheistic in their outlook and their worldview, and that informed them their particular view of secularism, which then resulted within Europe at the time. Yeah, so I think there was a political motivation rather than just purely looking at the argument and the evidences and coming up with certain intellectual arguments for it. And I think part of that was because they saw the failures of Christianity, particularly when it was applied on a state level.
Yeah, I wanted to, in my understanding, the most charitable understanding of deism I could put forward is that basically they don't see a necessity for revelation. So as Sharif and the others put it, there are different understandings of deism. There are different brands of deism. I think the common factor is mostly non-interaction. So God's non-interaction with the world, right? Some affirm God's goodness, some don't. Some affirm God's wisdom, some don't. And some even affirm judgment and a hereafter, and others don't. I think the most charitable account of deism I've found was the idea that you shouldn't believe anything beyond what is rationally accessible, like directly rationally accessible. And we can, let's say for the deist that believes in the hereafter and God's goodness and all of that stuff and judgment, if the deist believes that we can arrive at these things rationally, then they would see a non-necessity in the idea of revelation. And I think the main problem with that is that generally, any line of reasoning you're going to take, there's going to be an aspect of non-necessity. Reason, you don't have to be an absolutist about your reason. So even if we can't make the stronger case for revelation's necessity, just the fact that revelation is possible and rationally accessible by the deist standards, because we don't believe that we're just going to believe in revelation without reason. If revelation itself is rationally accessible, then that falls within the scope of what this kind of basically the deist that's very close to theism would require. So and I think one of the problems, as Jake was mentioning, like the miracles and stuff like that, and other aspects of religion that aren't necessarily rationalizable, we believe that they are. We believe that they are indirectly through revelation. So yes, there's let's say there's no logical or rational necessity in the existence of angels or something, right? But then it is rationally accessible if you can justify your belief in a particular revelation, and you have solid rational ground in believing that it is of the good God that the deist believes in. Then if that God is good and you've arrived at all these stuff rationally, then by testimony, whatever that God tells you about the unseen world is rationally justifiable. It is, testimony is a source of knowledge. So yeah, I think that's just generally my the most charitable account I can put forward for deism, and just very briefly why I find it problematic.
Okay, mashallah. Does anyone want to sort of add on to what Abdul was saying there?
No, I think that's pretty much
not directly on
answered
that part,
the
no.
motivation and the explanation. Yeah.
Okay, mashallah. So what should we jump into now? So we've got a number of questions we've written down here, I think. So if you like, we could just start running through them if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've answered, the first one was what is deism? So I think we've covered that pretty well. Second one, what are the different views on deism? What's the common thread? I think we've covered that as well, would you say? Or
Yeah.
Number 3, what's the historical development and motivation for deism? We've covered that. Number 4, how do we address creator without consciousness? So this is basically deism in the form of viewing the creator as a sort of like a mechanical object, almost like a thing that's just pumping out things. It's not really aware of the things it's pumping out. It very much it ends up kind of moving towards this atheistic multiverse generator.
More like naturalism, right? I mean,
yeah. It's pretty,
because we
had to make a distinction between them.
Yeah, we've talked about before I think in stage 2 cosmological arguments about the argument for the necessary being having a will. And I think that's an important thing behind this discussion, because if the universe, isn't eternal, didn't always exist alongside God, and there was a beginning to it, and God chose by his will to create the universe, well, then there's some type of intent and intelligence behind that. And you can't just get rid of that and sort of throw it by the wayside. Now, I think the question for the deist that I would have is, what's the reason that God chose to create? And from my perspective anyway, on this whole question, I think the deist is going to have a difficult time answering that, because it's just, is it just like a random quantum fluctuation, like a quantum event, like a naturalistic explanation, or is it something that he chose to actually do? There was intent and will behind it. And I think that's an important point for people to consider when thinking about deism.
Yeah, just to add to that as well. So this obviously, like we've just mentioned there, is pretty much one for one, very, very similar to this atheistic naturalist approach to the multiverse generator. Now, the thing is so they usually move towards the multiverse theory in order to explain the sort of lottery win that we have here with this particular universe. This, it's lottery win isn't even just a good analogy. Like, it's like winning the lottery to win a ticket that gets you to win another lottery. That if you win, you get another ticket to another lottery. So like you're winning loads of lotteries one after the other in order to get what we have here. And they do this because they want to move away from these ideas of sort of fine tuning. And they want to say, well, we can explain this and, the unlikeliness of it if we have an infinite amount of universes being generated. Now, this really doesn't answer the problem. It just puts it back a step as well, in the sense that, now you have this really complex thing that is also seemingly fine-tuned in order to be able to produce universes, and within which the realm of possibility is that you get a universe like the one we have here. So you don't really get away from this problem at all. You've still got the same issue, just on a meta level, on the multiverse level.
Yeah. And I think just as Jake has also mentioned, this is why we did one of the shows on stage 2. So this idea of, does a necessary being have a will, or is it just simply some mechanical force out there? And I think in that discussion we sort of presented a number of arguments. We presented the argument that because an actual infinite cannot exist, then this results in the fact that the universe is a temporal being. It's something that became, it didn't always exist. And if it didn't always exist, but the cause always existed, then the best explanation would be that the cause, I, this creator, had intentionality decided because the creator wasn't determined on to create. Yeah. So, if people want to go into that discussion more, we can go, I'd recommend you watch the stream. Similarly, we argued as well, which is that consciousness exists within the universe. We know consciousness exists. We had a discussion about the hard problem of consciousness, where there's an unbridgeable gap between non-conscious physical things, motions in matter, and particles in motion. How this causes consciousness, and the conclusion to that discussion was that actually, because it's unbridgeable, consciousness cannot be something that's a product of simply the physical and materialistic and non-conscious agents. So therefore there needs to be something that has actualized consciousness within the universe, within human beings. And that requires, therefore, if there is a creator, it would be the creator that's actualizing consciousness. It cannot be a naturalistic, non-conscious agent, because naturalistic, non-conscious things cannot cause consciousness. So therefore, it must be conscious. So that was the third argument. I think there was a fourth argument that that was the second argument. Third argument we sort of used was the argument that why are we giving arbitrary limits to the creator that we don't see within the universe? So within the universe we see human beings having consciousness, but then we're suddenly saying that this unlimited necessary being has all these properties except the property of consciousness. This is just arbitrary, and this renders the creator into a contingent rather than a necessary being. I think there was a fourth argument. Maybe Abdul can remember the fourth argument.
Yeah, I think the fourth argument was somewhere along the lines of like a non-deterministic behavior that's not determined by external factors, and how that is analogous to free will. I mean, it seems like there's something non-deterministic about the way we freely behave. And generally, I think the deist is already like on the same page with us as far as this question is concerned, generally speaking. And I don't know if I'd classify a deist who doesn't believe in a conscious creator as a deist. I think that's because there's this new age, like there's this trend these days of atheists believing in a necessary foundation, in a necessary, eternal, even all-powerful, or they'll grant you everything except for the consciousness part, and they will call it a naturalistic explanation. I'm not sure whether that would be deism or naturalism, because even with the naturalist, I would tell them that they're just getting awfully close to a theistic conception of God. But in any case, I think that generally deists affirm that the creator is conscious, and I think the question I would ask is precisely what Jake asked. I mean, why did the creator create the universe? And there's this aspect of wisdom that's just comes along with any notion of consciousness or intentionality, because what wisdom is to create something or do an action with some kind of end, like as a means to an end. That's basically how we act. I mean, the free will itself, there might be an aspect of arbitrariness to it, but the intentionality of the action, almost by definition, would have some kind of end to achieve. And I think I read this somewhere in Bassam Zawadi has a very, very good paper on deism. I skimmed through it very quickly a while ago, and I think that's where this is mentioned, and there's a quote on it. But generally speaking, consciousness and intentional action kind of indicates that there is a purpose behind the action, and you can from there you can take it to the question of the supreme nature. Yeah, that's the paper. Excellent paper. You can take it to the question of the supreme nature of this deistic conception of God. And a lot of deists do affirm things like the goodness of God, the intelligence of God, maybe not the omnipotence or omniscience of God or omnibenevolence of God, but maybe like the maximal or exceedingly he's exceedingly good, he's exceedingly intelligent, exceedingly knowledgeable and powerful and whatnot. And that alone raises the question of, if this being has an intention to create, and there is always going to be a particular end to this means that you're putting forward, which is the act you're doing, then by if we contrast that with the supremacy of this being, the supreme nature of this being, and the maximal traits he has in relation to ours, then you would expect that goal to be greater than a goal that you would have for doing something. So so I think there's an analogy to be made there between our intentions doing things and God's. And also you can consider it from the angle of God's goodness and evil, and what it means for God to be good, and how that relates to God's intention and his interaction with creation. I also wanted to say something very quick about this interaction thing, because there's this, it's almost like there's this, because what is it to interact, right? It's almost as if there's this self-subsisting or self-dependent or independent thing, and interacting with it would be, or intervening would be, for me, as like an external agent that's alien to the entity to do something or to interact with it in a certain way. But it's almost like that's I think that's an incorrect picture of the theistic God, because we don't believe that God intervenes when he does miracles, and aside from that, he isn't interacting with the world. We believe that God sustains the world at every moment. And we believe that we can also arrive at that through reason. And a lot of deists agree with us in that sense. So it almost becomes, superfluous, this idea of God's intervention, because he's already directly sustaining the world continuously. So I don't understand how the question of intervention becomes relevant, because by that understanding, he's always intervening.
Inshallah. Should we move on to some other questions, or does anyone want to sort of jump on the back of what Abdul was saying there? No? So we got here as well. So how do we address the idea? So as well, if I can just get everyone to keep the answers to these as succinct as possible. We're about 40 minutes in, and inshallah, we want to try and move on to bringing guests on. So let's try to keep it succinct, inshallah. So number 5, how do we address the idea of an imperfect creator who isn't worthy of worship? This obviously coincides with this notion within Deism that God isn't really interested in us, and so therefore worship is pretty pointless. If God isn't interacting with you, he's not trying to guide you. It gets to this point where it's like, well, why would you worship this thing? If it's not even really paying attention to you, it's not really bothered whether you're doing that or not, why do it? I think really quickly. So I think one strand of deism, which I don't think I mentioned at the beginning, is this idea that yes, there is a creator, but it's an imperfect creator, therefore it's not worthy of worship. Therefore, we don't even have to seek out, revelation or anything how to worship it whatsoever. But the idea would be self-contradictory, because if you come to a conclusion of a necessary being, you come into a conclusion that this being is basically perfect. So there is the necessity for a necessary being because of the imperfection and the weakness of contingent beings. Contingent beings could always be another way. But when regards to the necessary being, it cannot be any other way. So if you've got an imperfect necessary being, it could be slightly more perfect or slightly better. Therefore, it wouldn't be considered a necessary being. So as a result, we can sort of discount this idea that this necessary being would be imperfect. Just a self-contradiction in that sense.
Can't hear you. You're muted, bro.
Jake, sorry, do you want to add something?
No, I'm good with that. I think we could move on maybe to the next question. Kind of rapid fire this.
So number 6, how do we address the creator creating the world and isn't interested in it? Yeah, so this sort of ties to the notion as well. It's like the being that like it puts all this effort into making an aquarium and then just doesn't even maintain it, just leaves it. And how then, if it's leaving it and it's not really maintaining it, do you get this increase in complexity? Rather than just what you see in, for example, if you leave a very well put together aquarium, it gets more and more chaotic. It gets worse. You never really get this sort of movement up towards a complexity or more order. So does anyone want to jump in on that? Maybe Abdulrahman or Jake? You've not.
Yeah. So I guess I would have to ask the person, well, what do they mean that God is not interested in the world, right? Because if even many deists believe that God at minimum conserves the world and he maintains it, every moment in time, well, then obviously he's interested in it in some degree. He didn't just create it and then it poofed out of existence like 5 minutes later. I mean, he's been sustaining it over billions of years based on the most current science. So, I mean, to me, that's enough to show, well, whoever the creator is, he's got to be interested in it to some degree, because it's not like he just created it and then all of a sudden, it's gone. So, I mean, at minimum, if he's conserving the universe at every moment, to me, that shows interest already right off the bat. And then we can just talk about more. Well, if he's doing that, then it seems like he would care about the things that are in the universe because he wants them to continue to exist. And so maybe he would like some sort of relationship with humans or with the beings in the universe and provide guidance. That's where sort of the next step comes in. But I think this idea of a creator who creates the world and has no interest whatsoever is completely ridiculous based on even a common deist exception of the fact that God is sustaining the universe at every moment. So
because that's the great point there, is that it's not as if these things can just be sort of created and then left to run on their own. Everything staying as it is, the laws continuing to be the way they are, requires that the creator of them is sustaining them. Like, to what's stopping them from just ceasing to be the way they are, or just to everything to just drift off into a thin layer of dust? Like, there is this idea that that whatever is creating the universe is not just creating it, but continually sustaining it and allowing it to continue to be in existence and not just poof and disappear.
And that kind of goes into the next question there, number 7. You were kind of touching on it already, so I don't know if you want to expand on that or if anybody else wants to go.
Just really quickly, very briefly. So obviously, a contingent being are those things which are possible beings. They could be in another way. Yeah, they could have different attributes. They could not necessarily exist. Yeah. So when we're positing a necessary being, what we're saying is that this necessary being had to determine every single attribute of every single possible being that exists in the entire universe. Yeah. So it is very much the case that the creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is intervening in maintaining and ensuring that every attribute is fixed in a particular way. Yeah. So therefore, when we boil water, we don't necessarily think that water is going to boil at 110 degrees Celsius at room conditions rather than 100 degrees Celsius. We expect that. So there is a consistency within the universe. That consistency comes from a necessary being who's basically determining the different attributes within existence.
Abdulrahman,
so just to add on to what Jake said, just to sort of clarify that point.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. No, I think you guys covered it.
Okay, so this now transitions to the next question. So the universe operates according to natural law and doesn't need the creator. Now, how do you think the best? Because I guess an argument that could be made here is that, well, why can God not just make a law that then he can move away from and no longer requires him to keep it as it is? It's sort of like it's a stamp. He sets it, and then like a computer program, for example. You write your computer program and then you walk away. Why is it that isn't conceivable? So I guess an interesting point here is even with the analogies that we give here, for example, with the computer, it's not like you can just leave a computer and then walk away. There are other things that it requires in order to keep itself going. For example, it needs energy, and in order to get the energy in there, you need people maintaining, the infrastructure, which gives rise to the power that sort of allows these things to continue. So I think any sort of analogy that we give in order to try to justify this sort of disinterested God that creates the natural laws and then takes a step back and leaves them, ultimately wait. Was that baby just invaded? One moment. Yeah, does someone jump on that while I just get the baby out there?
Yeah, I think it's a question of so for me, I think it is conceivable, right? That that God creates. I'm not saying he would walk away, astaghfirullah. What I'm saying is that this idea that something could be God could give something the capacity to have this like inherent causal power. It doesn't seem plausible to me, but it's conceivable at least. But for me, that's not the fundamental question. If you're asking whether God cares about the universe, or if you're asking whether there is some kind of purpose behind God's creation of the universe, because even if God did create the universe with some kind of inherent causal power, he did, as Sharif just put it, he did create everything within the universe to operate based on certain laws, which has certain consequences. It just has certain deterministic consequences, if you like. And the fact that that's the case, and the fact that God has that level of intelligence, and as we mentioned earlier, this exceeding maximal level of intelligence, that would again indicate some kind of intentionality and purpose behind God's creation. And something else is the idea that these causal questions, these cosmological questions, aren't really the only questions we're trying to answer. They're not the only questions out there. So there's a question of explanatory depth as well when you're trying to assess a theory. There's whether it explains the data at hand, and the idea of the cause of the universe, we've addressed that. The theist answers it, and the deist answers it. But what follows that, and the purpose and the intentionality of the creator in relation to his intelligence, as well as our moral intuitions and our sense of moral accountability, and the teleology of the universe that a lot of deists agree with, these are things that need to be explained as well in light of whatever theory you're proposing. And theism explains that much, much better than deism ever could.
I'm back. Sorry about that, guys.
That's okay.
My daughter just absolutely rampaged in.
No worries, bro.
She's working for the FBI. But yeah. So what did I miss? Is there anything else you wanted to sort of add to that, or should we move on to the next?
The final question.
The final question. Right. So did you just talk about miracles? Did you move on to the next question while I was not here?
Why we expect special revelation, that one.
Yeah, no, but we would just, when I was here before FBI kicked my door in, we were talking about the natural laws, the universe.
Yeah.
According to natural law. There's another one after that. Miracles are impossible.
No, we didn't move on. I addressed that one, so right now you can move on to the next one.
Oh, right, yeah, the miracles are impossible. Sorry, I've got a different list, but yeah, there's that one.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, miracles are impossible. Therefore, God cannot intervene in the universe.
We had a whole stream about this one. So.
Yeah. I guess we could just refer people to that stream.
I think Jake might have something to say about this, maybe.
Yeah, summarize.
Yeah, I mean, like you guys said, people can go back and watch the stream that we had on these the question of whether or not miracles are logically impossible and whether or not they cause a serious problem. There are several different ways that we attacked it, but one of the ways is by saying that there's nothing really about the laws that are absolutely logically necessary. They may be necessary in some sense in terms of our physical universe, but they don't have a logical necessity. And so there's no reason for which we should even have the laws in the way that they are. That calls out for an explanation, which we think is the creator. That's one point. But the idea that a miracle can sort of contradict a law of nature doesn't really make sense. And the way that I explained it is that laws of nature, whether it be laws of thermodynamics, for example, you take laws of thermodynamics, they depend and are conditional laws that are dependent upon what's called a isolated system. So it says if the system is isolated, then this is what you should expect to occur. Even within the definition of the supposed natural law is a conditional statement. A conditional statement implies contingency. Therefore, it is not a necessary law. And given that fact, there's nothing about it that would be a logical necessity. The second thing is that if a miracle were to occur, that it would be an example in which the system is not isolated, which means because an isolated system is a system in which there's no causal influence from outside of the system. So there's no exchange of matter and energy either from in the system or outside of it, and vice versa. And so if that's the case, if a miracle were to occur, it would be an instance in which there would be an exchange of matter and energy, or at least causal influence from outside of the system, in which case the conditional law that these natural laws are built upon of the system being isolated wouldn't be fulfilled. Therefore, the law wouldn't apply. It's not that the law would be contravened or contradicted. It's just that it would be an instance in which the conditional thing that the law is based on wouldn't work. It wouldn't be applied. So there's really no contradiction there. There's several other ways that we can approach this discussion of why there is no logical incompatibility between miracles and laws of nature. But I'd refer the viewers back to a stream where we had a whole stream on it. You know, the other brothers gave their take on it. We each kind of offered a different way of arguing the point. And I think people are free to check that out if they want more information.
MashaAllah. And so the last one here is, why expect special revelation? So what compels us to expect or seek out revelation? So if we can give like a rather succinct answer to this, and then inshallah we'll start interacting with the guests. Just so you know now, the link to join the stream is pinned in the live chat. So if you're watching now, just head to the top. You should see a blue bar with a comment from the Thought Adventure podcast saying join the stream, and then a link. If you click that, it will take you to StreamYard, and inshallah we can pull you up on the panel one at a time for a discussion on this particular subject matter.
Before we get to the last question, now I just want to add to that. Obviously, there's not as many deists out there. It's not a very popular position, but if we do have any deists in the comment section and would like to join the live stream, we would like to give deists an absolute preference to join. Otherwise, we will take comments or questions from other, different people with different worldviews. But deists would be obviously, preferred in this situation.
Yeah, and for those of you who are new here as well, so this isn't going to be sort of like a mobbing. I know there are 4 of us, but the emphasis on this show in particular is to have polite conversation. So if you're anxious or nervous that we might try to embarrass you or anything like that, we give you our word now that this isn't the ethos that we run with. It's going to be a civil conversation where you just get to say what you say, and we'll have a back and forth where maybe we'll tease certain answers out of you with particular questions and kind of work on that, and vice versa. Obviously, you can ask us questions as well with regards to that. So so with regards to the question that we were sort of ending the very, very long introduction with, why should we expect revelation? I'll slide the ball over to Sharif for this one. What is it that compels us to expect or seek out revelation?
So, as I mentioned earlier about the issue of contingent beings are possible beings whose attributes have to be determined or actualized by a necessary being. Now, as human beings, we have certain attributes which are not necessary for ourselves. For example, we have this desire to engage in moral acts. We want to be seen as moral human beings, moral agents. Now, that desire to be seen as moral agents even if people want to argue, well, it's an evolutionary trait or it's whatever it is that we develop these things, what we came to this conclusion is that everything within the universe, whatever process the universe came about as a result, was actualized and determined by the Creator, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, the desire to want to be seen as moral agents is not something that comes from us per se, but it comes from this necessary being, this Creator. So this Creator is saying, look, He's created us with this desire to want to be moral. Now, how do we understand morality? How do we ground morality? It means we have to ground it within the Creator, and it's not something that we can come to naturally from our own minds. We therefore need special revelation in order to tell us, certainly on the details of morality, what is it are good or what is it that's bad. Yeah. So as human beings, if I'm trying to work out what my moral outlook is, I'm going to have to look for a message from my Creator. That's firstly. Second argument would be this argument from Fitra, which is, again, from the human being, we have this attribute that desires to worship. This desire to worship ultimately is created or determined by the necessary being, by this Creator. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this Creator, is created within human beings, through whatever mechanism, but ultimately it's been created within human beings with this desire to connect with the Creator. How do we connect with the Creator? Well, either I know what the Creator wants in terms of my connection and relationship, or I would have to have revelation from the Creator to tell me how to connect and form that relationship with the Creator. Because my mind is limited and I'm trying to connect with the unlimited, then I need the unlimited, this Creator, this necessary being, to tell me how to worship, how to form this relationship, and therefore how to satisfy this instinct or this fitra of sanctification or worship that seeks out this worship. So therefore, as a human being, even if I come to the conclusion that a necessary being exists, a necessary being has will, intentionality, a necessary being intervenes within the universe by maintaining the universe, or at least determining the universe's various laws, then at the same time, I as a human being would seek out moral guidance and also guidance of how to worship from the Creator by seeking out a message from the Creator. However that message comes to me, but I would be looking for that. So that's how I would go through that process of why we would be concerned, why it becomes more compelling to the mind to seek out a message or a messenger from this divine being, this necessary being.
Just a small follow-up there, because some deists would say that we can arrive at certain things like certain objective moral facts rationally, and even if we were to concede that, because maybe we could, then we still don't have a means at arriving at things like moral particulars. So you can arrive at moral universals, but moral particulars are very significant within how we determine our moral framework and our basically conduct in this world. The second thing is what Sharif was saying about our intuitions and our fitra and our desire to worship God, and what some people would say is that that intuition doesn't have to be reliable and they can be skeptical of it. But then see, once you arrive at a intentional creator of the universe, rationally speaking, that should already widen your scope of acceptable evidence. Because if I'm looking for evidence for why a certain event occurred, and I know that the cause is purely naturalistic, I will look at the event in the effect in a naturalistic way. If I have a means to determine that the cause is an intentional agent, I'll look at the effect I'll alter my view of the effect. So what the cause is alters our view of how to deal with the effect that we're observing, and it sort of widens or narrows our scope of acceptable evidence. So things like our intuitions about God and our desire to worship God, the fact that they were created by God, is something that needs to be taken into consideration. Also, if the deist is going to be skeptical of this intuition on the basis that, God could have given it to us for no reason, and, maybe he's just enjoying it or whatever, or it doesn't mean anything, well, you should be skeptical about your reason as well, because maybe God gave you a reason. What if he just gave it to you and he's misleading you to the conclusions that you arrive at? So, I think all in all, this idea that your scope of evidence should be widened as a deist is a plausible idea.
Okay, mashallah. So we've pretty much gone through all of the sort of questions that we've highlighted there, which we think are important to go over. So we're going to move on to now bringing guests onto the show. Like we just want to emphasize here, deists are going to be given preferential treatment. If you do want to join the stream, the link is pinned in the live chat. So if you have a look in the live chat, you look at the top, there's going to be a constant comment that doesn't move by Thought Adventure Podcast saying join the stream and then a link. Click that and you'll be taken to the back of the studio and we'll bring you in. And obviously, if you're a deist in the private chat, if you could just let us know with a comment that you are a deist as well, inshallah. But anyway, so we're going to bring on our first guest. We've got here Thinkerman. Hello, Thinkerman.
Hello, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So can we just get a bit of a background about who you are, what you believe, whether or not you're a deist, and obviously we can get the conversation going there.
Yeah, so I'm 27 years old. I used to be Muslim. I won't say I'm not a Muslim anymore, but I'm still thinking about it. As far as my research is going and what I believe now, I feel that atheism is the most likely option so far, then deism, and then lastly theism. But it's not like I've come to a conclusion. I'm still searching, but that's what I think so far.
Okay, so with regards to the topic of this particular conversation, obviously it's deism versus theism.
Yep.
So do you want to take the position of deism here, for the sake of obviously the subject matter? And so you're saying that you find deism more reasonable than theism.
Yeah.
Is that your position, yeah?
Yeah, sure. And I would like to talk about two things. One would be your claim that something that begins to exist has a cause, because you use that to get to theism, right?
No, that would lead to deism as well, by the way. So we're not going to be discussing that in particular because deism presupposes that also.
Like I'm with you on a necessary being. I think that an infinite regress is probably impossible.
So we don't need to have a discussion on that then in particular. So the main thing we really want to focus on here, and we don't want to get distracted with other conversations that are superfluous or irrelevant to the particular topic, which is specifically deism versus theism. Yep. So which points would you like to talk about with regards to that?
I guess that then we should talk about why that necessary being has to be God. Why does it have to have
consciousness and an interest?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, what brand of deism would you represent that would say otherwise? I mean, this is a genuine question. Because I think deism assumes that the necessary being is a creator God, isn't it?
Right. So if it's
that's pretty much just atheism versus theism, or atheism versus deism at that point.
So for the purpose of this argument, I'll assume that a creator God did create the universe, but he's not interested in intervening. He just wants to observe, something like that. That would be my position for this argument.
Okay. And why would you think that?
It's because it's not that I think that that's necessarily the case, but I think that since we cannot know for sure what God's mind is, how he makes his decisions, exactly what his nature is, so it's a possibility that he just wanted to create the universe so he can observe us. He doesn't have that much interest in intervening.
Okay, so were you listening to the stream earlier when we were having a discussion?
Not all of it. I heard some of it, but not all.
We tried to put forth a few points as to why we think that God would care about the universe and would be interested in it. Yeah.
Can you give me like one or two so I can give you like a counter argument, or if I agree with it, then I'll say that I agree with you.
Okay, so I mean, typically one of the examples I gave was that even under deism, most forms of it assume that God is not only the creator of the universe, but he's the sustainer of the universe at every moment in time. And if God is every moment in time sustaining the universe, well, then it seems that he cares about it in some way. Otherwise, why didn't he just create it and, sort of let it go? So that was one example. And then Sharif also gave an example about the contingent things in the universe didn't have to be the way that they are. And the way that they are because of God himself. And so that would show that he would care about not only the universe, but everything in it down to the smallest degree. So Sharif, I don't know if you want to expand on that point any further or if I represented you well enough.
Yeah. So I was just going to ask Thinkerman. So you sort of said that you agree that there needs to be a necessary being. Is that right?
Yeah, for the sake of the argument, I agree.
I'd rather not for the sake of the argument. I want to know what you believe. I understand we were talking about Deism. Yeah, go on.
I personally do think that it's that if I had to make a choice, I would say that a necessary being or beings do exist.
Okay, so why would you affirm a necessary being?
Because I think that infinite regress does not seem like the better explanation.
Okay, so in terms of the necessary being, you sort of asked a question about consciousness. So are you thinking that, okay, so we've come to the conclusion that the necessary being, because there's a impossibility or absurdity of the infinite regress, so it's more likely for a necessary being. So what stops you now from being a theist as opposed to an atheist?
Yeah, the question is again that that necessary being, we know next to nothing about it. It could be a natural thing. It could be it could be a conscious being. Yes, that is a possibility. But I'm not sure how to what evidence we have to conclude that it's definitely a conscious being and it cares about us.
Okay, so one of the arguments would be is that if the universe is finite, meaning everything that exists, the contingent beings are all finite, but this necessary being is eternal, then you have this problem of an eternal cause but a temporal effect.
I don't agree that the necessary being is eternal.
But that's the definition of a necessary being.
Yeah. So do you know when we say necessary, the definition of that is that it cannot not exist?
By eternal, I mean, I don't think that it's eternal in the past necessarily. I think that all of reality, I mean, this is speculation. I'm not saying that I have evidence to back this up, but it is a speculation that all of reality started a certain point, a certain number of years ago. And before that, it's not like there was nothing. It's just there was no before that. Speaking before that would be absurd.
So then it did come from nothing because it began without a cause. There's no explanation for the cause.
Yep, it's the same as a God. I would say that it's not like it came from nothing, like there was nothing and then something came into existence. Not like that. It's like there was a first instance of time.
God is eternal. So it's not. I mean, it's not analogous, and the situation that you're bringing up is sort of like an Graham-Oppian view, where you have something that begins. It has a beginning without a cause.
Yes, it's a brute fact.
No, but it's not merely just a brute fact. You're saying that you think that something can have a beginning without a cause.
Yes.
Okay, based on what?
Based on the necessity of something having to begin, because I think an infinite regress is unlikely.
Okay, why is it unlikely to have something that's necessary and eternal?
By eternal, I don't think that it's possible to have something go infinitely into the past, because I think it would run into the same infinite regress problem. And if by eternal you mean that like it had a starting point before which there was no before which, and then in that sense I can grant you that I also agree that there was a necessary being which was eternal. But I do think that that eternal necessary thing did have a starting point.
If it had but this is the thing. So what you're saying there is contradictory. If it had a starting point, what you're saying is there was a moment before that starting point where
there was no moment before that starting point. Speaking before the starting point is absurdity. There is no before it.
How are you defining time, Thinkerman? How are you defining time?
Time would be, I think, a measure of change.
Okay.
Something like
So
that.
there was a point where there was no change. Yeah? Is that what you're saying? And then there was a point that there was change.
Yeah, sure. I think.
Right. And so
I'm not
did this necessary
sure.
being did this necessary being exist during the point in which there was no change?
There was no point in time in which the necessary being did not exist. Right.
Okay.
As
Okay.
soon as time began, the necessary thing was there. Almost with the start of time, it coincides with the start of time.
So that
Right.
not to say that the necessary being had a starting point. That's just to say that the necessary being existed at a point where there was no change, and so by your definition of time, no time. But that doesn't mean that the necessary being had a starting point. It just means that when time began, that necessary being was present. That's not the same thing as what you were saying, where you were making the claim that the necessary being has a starting point.
Yeah, think, man. The best way is substitute the word time and past. Just substitute that with the word change, because you're saying time is the measurement of change. So you're saying that there was a point where there was no change. Yeah. So there's X that existed with no change, and then afterwards it caused Y, which had change.
Right.
Does that make sense?
So there was a point before which there was nothing. At that point, something existed. I don't know what it was, but it was a necessary being. I'm not saying time was the only thing that existed at that point. There was something other than time as well, of course, that caused the universe to shape it into what it is today.
But think, man, we have to be really careful with the words and the terminologies that we use. So when we use the word necessary being, we're talking about something that's eternal, that always exists, yeah, doesn't cease to exist. When we talk about contingent being, we're talking about something that doesn't always exist, cannot exist, can exist in another way. So that's a contingent being. So if you're saying necessary being began, or there was a point where the necessary being did something or began to exist, then you're not positing a necessary being anymore. You're positing a contingent being. Does that make sense, Thinkerman?
Listen, even if I take your definition or my definition, that time would be a measurement of change.
Yeah.
How is this stance not correct or contradictory?
Because then what you're saying that there's X which exists eternally. So eternally in this context would be that X exists perpetually without change. Yeah. And that this thing, X, this unchanging state, caused something to occur, which then changed.
Right.
Yeah.
So the contradiction would be, what would be the
not necessarily contradiction. I'm just saying this is what you would say, isn't it? It's the opposition.
The only contradiction would be present in you saying that this necessary being had a starting point.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that's an issue, because this suggests that there was a moment when obviously because you're making that argument because you're trying to say the necessary being isn't eternal because it had a beginning. But if it had a beginning, then there was prior to that because what does it mean to say that there's a beginning if there wasn't a something or a nothing in which that beginning became present?
Maybe as well, another way to think about this, Thinkerman, is if you've got an unchanging, because some cosmologists, they argue for that prior to this universe, there was an unchanging state. Now, if you've got an unchanging state, what do you expect that unchanging state to do? It remains unchanging, isn't it?
Right.
Yes. So for it to then change and cause things that do change, then you have to have a reason, an explanation for that. If it's unchanging, it's not going to change. If it's unchanging eternally, it will remain unchanging eternally. Yeah. But we don't live in an unchanging state. We live in a changing state. So something's happened to this unchanging state to cause things to change.
Right. But what I'm saying is that it's not. I'm not arguing for an unchanging state, right? What I'm saying is that there was an initial starting point of time. Otherwise, we'd run into the infinite regress, which we want to avoid. That's why time began a certain time ago, and from that moment, and on that moment, there was something that existed, or some things that existed, and they caused other things to happen. I would take it back that there was never a time when there was no change. I would say that change has always been there, and before that change, it would be absurd.
But
Can
then you have the
I try to help? I want to try to help.
you
What's
try
his
to
name? Thinkerman a
avoid.
bit. Yeah. So yeah, let me try to help you a bit, Thinkerman. So what you're
Sure.
basically saying is, if you're going to respond to what Sharif is saying about the necessary being, then what you want to say is that there's a necessary event, okay? And that necessary event, it brought this first necessary thing into existence. And the reason that occurred, the only explanation you have for that is necessity. It's only, it occurred without a cause, and your only explanation for that is the idea that it's necessary. Why is it necessary? Because you want to avoid an infinite regress. Why do you want to avoid an infinite regress? Because an infinite regress seems to be absurd. Now, here's a question. Is something being uncaused, is something having a beginning and being uncaused absurd, or is it not absurd? By the same lines that you determine that an infinite regress is absurd, would you be able to apply a similar type of reasoning to bring the position that something can begin uncaused to an absurdity?
I would say that it's not necessarily absurd, because there is no other way other than an infinite regress. So it's necessary. Like if you were to say that in our universe or in Earth, something is coming out of nothing, then yes, I would say that seems very unlikely, or maybe even impossible, depending on your worldview. But at the start of the cosmos, we don't know what the conditions were at that time. And I don't think it would be absurd to say that something came.
But Thinkerman, focus for a second, because you're saying that an infinite regress is problematic, but you don't know what an infinite regress is like, and I could apply the same kind of reasoning to tell you, well, hey, why don't we just accept the idea of an infinite regress, because we don't know what an infinite regress is like. We're limited by a finite reality. So by your line of reasoning, both are out there. Both are options that are available for the taking. So why do you choose one over the another? And in response to the charge of absurdity to the one that you choose, you appeal to mystery, but you say that I can't do the same thing for an infinite regress.
There's just one problem with the infinite regress. Otherwise, I would have said that it's completely possible, because I don't agree with it, because I think that there's a contradiction in it. For some the reasons that
what's the contradiction?
Yeah, Sharif mentioned it in a video. I heard him say it, and I agreed with him. He said that for this moment to happen, an infinite amount of time would have to end, and an infinite amount of time ending is a contradiction.
Okay. So, but my basic point here, good. Okay, my basic point here is this: is that you find an infinite regress unreasonable because of the contradiction you just provided.
Yes.
Something beginning to exist without cause can be equally as reasonable and absurd. I'm sure just by a commonsensical approach to these questions, you can bring it to an absurdity. An infinite regress is a huge ontological cost that you might want to avoid, and you're like, okay, let me look for another option. Something beginning to exist without a cause seems to be a huge ontological cost as well. So by your line of reasoning, I want to apply what you're saying to both of these options. I want to say that I want to avoid both of these ontological costs, and I want to look for an option that allows me to evade both. That's the option we're providing you. So if you're going to be consistent about wanting to avoid absurdities, whether it's a contradiction or whether it's just, it just seems like an absurd belief you don't want to hold to, you should be open to the third option we're provided, which is a necessary being that exists eternally without the idea of an infinite regress. Because in the case of eternity, God could, on certain models, exist in a timeless state, which you already acknowledge. You acknowledge there is a changeless state. So there is a changeless state, and that changeless state does seem to be the most coherent answer to these two problems here. You should hold on to that one, although you might face the same problem of how is it the case. But you seem to be the kind of guy who wants to get rid of these absurdities, right? So there is a changeless state, and this necessary being that we're proposing that is eternal doesn't have this ontology of an infinite regress by successive addition, right? So there isn't the same absurdity could be avoided, on certain models of this necessary being. So why don't you go for that option rather than the clearly absurd claim that something can begin to exist without cause?
Okay, so I fully acknowledge that there is definitely a possibility that a necessary being like God created everything. Definitely, I don't think it's any more or any less absurd than the other option which I gave, which was something starting without a cause, because before it there was no before. But the reason
then why are you choosing one over the other?
Maybe we just changed his mind.
Yeah,
because I mean, at this point, before you gave the order, you said atheism, then deism, then theism, and now you're saying that they're equally likely. So at that point, you would have to say maybe they're tied for first. You wouldn't be able to keep that order.
Yes, and in that case, I'd ask why you would go for one over the other.
The thing with theism is, especially the theology of the Abrahamic religions, I personally I would like to understand how the God that you're proposing avoids an infinite regress. You mentioned that it does, but I'm not sure I understand. And one more thing, I did say that there was a time when there was no change, but then I took it back. And I said that no, there was never a time when there was no change.
What about deism? Without getting into Abrahamic God, what about deism?
Yeah, the only reason I put deism second was because all the religions that I've studied, I've seen some things that don't seem right to me, and that's why I put deism in second.
Yeah, but deism doesn't involve a religion.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I put it second.
Yeah, but no, why is he putting it second below atheism?
Because I think atheism makes more sense given the problem of evil, and why would a God that's all perfect, why would he do anything? It's problems like those.
You don't have to believe in an all perfect God on deism, but you see the issue here is this right now. Right now, you're trying to solve a problem, right? There's this issue of an infinite regress, and you're asking the question: how can the necessary being you're positing avoid an infinite regress? What we're saying is that there is a changeless state that, the ontology of this changeless state. Even if you're going to posit some kind of, divine notion of time. We acknowledge, if we're going to be consistent, we acknowledge that there can't be a state where there is an endless existence that is formed by successive addition, right?
Sorry, just really quickly, sorry. Do you understand that point, Thinker Man, what he just said about successive addition?
Yeah, I understand, but it still seems bit impossible.
No, he hasn't completed his argument. I'm just saying, do you understand what he means, that you cannot create an actual infinite through successive addition? That's what he said. Do you agree with that?
I mean, in other words, you can't add one, and ever come to creating an actual infinite, because there's always another one you can add.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
So what was the contradiction? What was the contradiction you mentioned about the infinite regress that you found problematic? Sharif
Yeah.
mentioned it. So there's a contradiction, and it relates to this idea of successive addition. So the idea here is that if there is an eternal state that is not actualized necessarily by a successive addition, and maybe it isn't even a quantitative infinite, it's a qualitative infinite, then this notion avoids the idea of an infinity by successive addition. Now, you're saying it still seems impossible. Can you explain why?
Yeah, it's what Sharif said earlier, that how would you produce change in a changeless state? So God existed in this changeless state where there was no time. Then
Yeah,
how would
that's the
Think,
idea
man.
of the
Yeah.
free will. So
Yeah,
that's where you have from
that's
your
right.
own experience. That's what you have. Go ahead, Sharif.
Yeah, I was going to say, thinking, man, what I was doing, I wasn't necessarily positing this is the creator. I was explaining to you how your own position, if you were to affirm a changeless state, which has no will, yeah, which simply is a changeless state, it wouldn't change. So you'd have that particular problem. So because we know we live in change, so we go back. We have a necessary being. The necessary being avoids an infinite regress. We say that this necessary being, it does not exist within this causal relationship, yeah, which is this idea that something is causing something else within itself or whatever, and it regresses. It doesn't exist as an actual infinite, which is a successive addition that equals infinity. It is a qualitative infinite. This qualitative infinite that's always existed caused the universe. Does that in any way seem unreasonable to you?
Yeah, I get the idea of a qualitative
Cool.
infinite. I don't really know whether a qualitative infinite is in reality something that's possible or not, but I understand what you're saying for sure.
So can
Right.
I ask as well? So go on, Sharif.
No, I was going to say just simply.
One more thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, you can speak.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, so what we've come to is we've come to the conclusion that there's a necessary being. This necessary being is eternal. Eternal doesn't necessarily mean eternal within a successive addition. This is really important. It doesn't mean eternal doesn't necessarily mean that it's undertaking, eternality in lots of different times, yeah, that exist in lots of different paths. Doesn't mean that. It just means that it's eternal in respect to of always existing, yeah. So that's what we're saying. Something always existed or cannot cease to not exist. That's first thing. Secondly, is we're saying that this thing that always existed and cannot cease not to exist caused the universe, caused something which is temporal, which didn't always exist. And that temporality that didn't always exist, yeah, is the effect of this cause. Now, if the cause is eternal, the effect would have to be eternal. But if the cause is eternal and the effect is temporal, then there needs to be something more than just simply having the naturalistic cause. You need to have a cause that had intentionality. Yeah. So that's one argument for the intentionality of a necessary being.
I mean, Thinkerman, I mean, this is something you have direct access to, because your innermost human experience does point to this idea of free will. It's just subjectively obvious, and it's probably more obvious than anything out there you can investigate from a third person perspective. And the idea here of what Sharif was saying is that if you can, you can already grasp the idea of a changeless state. And maybe you took it back, you don't understand what the state is, but if you're saying there is a starting point in time, then you can understand that if you can understand that there is change, then you can also understand that there's changelessness. And if from changelessness change comes, you need some kind of truly, literally non-deterministic event to take place, not like epistemically non-deterministic in the sense that you don't know what the cause is, but non-deterministic in the sense that it causes without a cause. And if you're talking about evidence, the closest thing we have to the idea of something occurring causelessly or without a cause, non-deterministic causation, is our own free will. And a lot of times I find it problematic that people don't look to this data point, which is the most accessible in human experience, as a point of evidence. That you could like define something that behaves causelessly or behaves without external influence as something that has free will. And if there's anything that behaves like that, it has to be that changeless state that non-mechanistically brings about change.
Now here's something very interesting. Before, when I said to you that there was something that existed without a cause, you said that that idea was absurd. But I said that given the circumstances, it might be possible. But now you're saying that all the time when people make decisions, every single time a person makes a decision, something uncaused is happening.
Good question. Good question. Yeah, I get what you're saying. So the idea of free will being causeless is we're not trying to posit some contra-causal mechanism in the sense that things randomly happen for no reason whatsoever. What we're saying is that there is this faculty of free will that has the ability to cause without external influence. It has the ability to non-deterministically cause. So, I mean, it's a good question. You caught the language very well. And so I don't mean that it's something that literally doesn't have a cause in the sense that it's just contra-causal and occurs like with no explanation whatsoever. It's to say that there is this faculty of free will that allows for you to initiate action without an external deterministic influence on you.
Just think about it like this, yeah? Under a materialistic paradigm, free will wouldn't really exist, would it?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, under a materialistic paradigm. Now, what Abdulrahman is saying is that we sense in our first-person experience that we have free will, yeah? Now, in order to give that as an explanation that there must be free will, there must be an agent that's given us that free will, that caused us to be able to make choices that are non-deterministic.
I just don't understand how it can be non-deterministic, but still have a cause. Like he's saying that it's not that it doesn't have a cause.
The cause is the capability of performing free actions. That's the cause. We have been created with the capacity to have free will. It's not something that's necessary for human beings. We didn't have to have free will, yeah, but we are caused with the capacity to have that free will. Now, that free will cannot have been, if our first person experience is true, that idea of free will cannot have been caused by materialistic mechanism. So it has to be a non-materialistic, a non-natural mechanism that gave us that capacity to make free choices. Now, we've posited that there's a necessary being. Now we're saying, well, the necessary being would have to be the cause for us to have the attributes that we have. One of those attributes is free will. So that necessary being has to have been something that's not materialistic in order to cause us to have free will.
And you guys would believe in the libertarian free will?
Yeah.
Oh no, we don't believe in libertarian free will, do we?
For God,
well, we don't believe
God.
in absolute. Yeah, for God, we as human beings don't have absolute free will.
Because libertarian free will is to say that the will, like the Christians, for example, hold on to libertarian free will. Or many of them do, at least, in the sense that this is something that is beyond the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That would be closer to the Mutazilites. So we don't hold that. So we do affirm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes our will to exist and sustains us, and that includes our will. So, and that he's aware of what we're going to do. He's aware of our choices and things like that. But so we wouldn't be considered libertarian free will advocates.
Yeah, we can't do things which are we can't do anything which is independent to the will of God. Yeah, so the i.e. meaning that we do things by the permission, bi'idhnillah, by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by permission of Allah. But the point here is this, thinker man, is you've got different arguments that are pushing us towards the fact that the nature of the necessary being has to be, or the properties of the necessary being has to be non-naturalistic. Can't just be a mechanical force. You have temporal effect, but an infinite cause, or eternal cause. So you need to have an explanation for that. You had what Abdulrahman said, which is that, well, we understand non-deterministic because of our own experiences of non-determinism, which is the fact that we have free will. Free will is a non-deterministic way of engaging in the universe. And then the fourth argument is the fact that free will itself within human beings, which is limited, which is by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, could not have arisen in human beings with a naturalistic mechanism. Therefore, it requires a non-naturalistic agent to have caused us, which we've already posited this agent, this necessary being. So therefore, this necessary being can't be natural. It would have had to have had a will in order to cause us to have a will as well.
I want to tell Thinkerman something, because earlier he said that it's a brute fact, right, about the beginning of the universe, or the beginning of time. Now there's a similar idea that kind of ties into free will here, and he asked a good question about causality and free will. So if we ask, about this faculty of free will and how it causes something to occur without cause, it seems contradictory, but what we mean is that it non-deterministically causes things to occur. And this faculty of choosing to do something, this faculty of freely choosing something, there seems to be an aspect of arbitrariness that's just inherent to it, right? There's something arbitrary about choosing between options when you don't have to choose between options. And what this might get back to is some kind of a brute contingency, right? That there is this, well, it's a contingency. Why? Because you could choose A or B, so neither A nor B had to be. You didn't have to choose either. And it's brute because that's just it's just the maximum explanatory depth you're going to reach with regard to this faculty of choosing. Now, what you're saying regarding this first event of time starting is that it's just a brute fact. It happened. It occurred. And I would, in a sense, agree with you. But what I would say is that I'm going further beyond you, and I'm saying that there is an explanation for that. We have something within our epistemic and within our observational data that can allow us to give an explanation for this brute contingency. So even the will, the fact of choosing to initiate something, can be that brute contingency. Right now, all I'm telling you is take that idea of this first event occurring with no cause and just add to it this explanation that you yourself have this very direct access to. It's within your innermost human experience that free will exists. Add it to it, and you still maintain your brute contingency, but you provide it with an explanation from within reality. So you say you add the faculty of will, because we're never going to come up with a better explanation than that. I mean, what scientists can say is that there's true indeterminacy in the sense that things really happen for no reason. Fine. But the questions we can ask about that are going to move to the realm of philosophy. Well, wait a second. Why couldn't it be? Why couldn't we make an analogy between these non-deterministic events and what we experience as free will, or this non-deterministic faculty of choice? So I think it's better to have an explanation than no explanation at all. And for that reason, I just think that's a little ingredient you can add to your model there that would provide you with an explanation that's very plausible, because you just have direct access to it.
Yeah, I think I learned a lot from you guys today. I was really curious as to how you guys would put in causality and free will along with the beginning of the universe, and I'll definitely think about what you guys said for sure.
Please do, and please join for more streams, and you can message us whenever you want, and we'd like to hear more from you.
And Thinkerman as well, just as a point, this is not something, we're not saying something which is outside the Islamic tradition. This is well embedded within the Islamic tradition. Imam Ghazali, he explains and gives various arguments for why the creator has a will and why it's not just some sort of necessary mechanical force. Imam Jawaini discusses the explanation or the arguments for a necessary being as well. So this is something that's contained within our Islamic tradition. So maybe where you are and the type of representation of Islam that we've come across is somehow seen as sort of backward or archaic. But really, this is not what Islam is. Islam created a flourishing civilization. It created intellectual giants within the Muslims. It created this flowering of civilization, which then spread to the rest of the world as well. Yeah, so and as Jake will probably mention, he's talked to many senior philosophers in analytic philosophy and theologians, and they are actually utilizing many of the Islamic arguments. In terms of many of the Islamic arguments related to talking about countering the idea of divine simplicity and things like that. So that's true, isn't it, Jake?
Yeah. I mean, I had Dr. Ryan Mullins on my show, and he talked about how the Christian tradition was really slow to rejecting divine simplicity. It's only been over the past 50 years, maybe, but Islam had done that from the get-go. I mean, in fact, Imam Ghazali wrote about it, and that was the first paper he said that he wrote that really tipped him off that there's something wrong with this doctrine. But that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, I think what Sharif is trying to say is that we're not just like four guys on the internet making up our own sort of thing here. Islam has a rich intellectual tradition that I think people should try to tap into, and that shouldn't always just judge Islam by the situation maybe that's in your locale.
Yeah, for sure. I've got a lot of studying to do with regards to what you said about free will and the start of the universe. I'll definitely try to get more of the Imam Ghazali's and all that opinion, all of that you said. And for sure, I'm going to call in next time you guys are live.
All right. Appreciate having you on, man.
Thanks. Bye.
Right,
yeah, take care. Oh, mashallah. Nice guy. So,
might want to go to Nazir because he said he had to leave in a couple of minutes. He had a quick question. Are you there, brother? I don't know if you can hear us. He mentioned in the private chat that he was getting ready to break his fast, so I don't know if he just walked away from his phone or something. Oh, okay, there you are. Walaikum salam.
I don't know what time it is out there. Here it's evening out. Christy, good evening. How are you?
Good, alhamdulillah. How's it going?
Fine. I'm very fine.
Yeah, you had a question.
My question is, I've been following your stream for a very long time now. I think since the first time I came across it on YouTube, and I gotta say it's been very informative, and it has led me to see a lot of things that I wasn't able to see before. And it got me the motivation to start engaging people with different worldviews. And in that course, I came across one person who happens to be a deist. Mm-hmm. So during our discussion, I was trying to get him, as I've said before, I was trying to get him to understand the rationale behind us accepting the attributes that we kind of attribute to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we were discussing about the eternal or the eternity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he was trying to bring in this problem of time, that our conception of time is like determined by our limitations. So the question I was able to show him that since we have accepted that God is the necessary being and that he is the one who created the universe, that is space, time, and matter all included. So that means he has to be outside of time. And my conception of time is that time is the interval between successive events. So if the creation of the universe is, for instance, event B, and everything that comes after that is event C. So therefore, for us to put God in time, we have to say that there is an event A that happens, let's say, sans creation. So, but since my own perception of time, time is the interval between spaces. Events. I can say that God can't be. I don't know how to put it, but the idea is that since God is spaceless and timeless and immaterial, and our perception of time is based on the events that are happening around us. For instance, when you're unconscious, you have no sense of time,
So
right?
is your question, so I'm just trying to understand your question. Is your question basically saying that if we define time as the measurement of events, and that there is
Yeah.
an event where there was God and no creation, and then there was an event where there was God and creation, doesn't therefore that imply that God's within time? Is that your question?
Oh, no, no. My question is that if there is an event where there is God and creation, and there is an event where there is God and there is no creation, so are we implying that God was idle before creation?
Yeah, we're saying that God is. So we I think there's a lot of things to be said on this particular topic. Yeah, but we have to really be very careful in terms of defining what we mean by
Yeah,
time in this context. Yeah. So as human
yeah,
beings, I'm talking about from our perspective, we understand time as the measurement of change, and in this context, we're talking about it as a measurement of the movement of objects or the measurement of causal relationships. Yeah. So we're looking at causality in terms of this thing causes that thing, and therefore we're talking about that as time. Now, if we start to understand it from that perspective, then when we're talking about the universe, we're talking about those things that exist within time. We're talking about things that exist within a causal relationship. They're caused, and there's effects from causes, etc. Now, in terms of
yeah,
the creator in that context, then the creator is outside of causal relationships, because the creator is not caused by anything other than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides for himself. So there's no external causes for the creator. So in that context, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is outside of quote unquote time, meaning he's outside of being caused by anything other than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala determines by his own will. But that doesn't necessarily mean if we start talking about God and then creation, God before creation and God after creation, that there wasn't some sort of separation that we can talk about, a distinction between that. Now, if people want to use the word time, they can use that. But, at the end of the day, it's just simply saying that, yes, there is a creator. This creator is not subject to causality, is not limited, is not determined external to itself, caused the universe, and therefore there was a, T God and then T God plus universe as well, if you want to use that in terms of that. I don't think any of the arguments for an atheist would have any impact in that particular view, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah. My problem was that I was looking at it because it makes intuitive sense to me to accept the fact that maybe since that whatever you call it, maybe it's time or whatever, before creation, God was not doing anything. Subhanallah, I don't know. It just makes some intuitive sense to me. But I was just looking at it. Maybe it has some religious implications, and then what Islam has to say about that. So I was just being cautious. So I had
Yeah.
to halt the discussion at that particular instance. But I have to be very honest with the guy and told him that it makes intuitive sense to me that God was not doing anything because he was there was no creation there, so we don't have the event A to say that he is in time. So, and to have an event, there has to be time and the space of that event and stuff like
See,
that.
yeah.
So,
See,
so that
I
was,
think the issue is that there's only so much our mind can comprehend, isn't it? In terms of
yeah,
we can only comprehend what's within the finite universe, and from that we can come to the conclusion and make certain inferences about the nature of a creator and necessary being, and that necessary being must have this property or attribute of will to cause the universe to exist. So we can come to these conclusions, but then to try to speculate in our mind to try to work out, well, what was it like? Because
mm,
for the creator, because we think within a temporal framework. That's the only way we're able to think. And our temporal framework is basically a thinking of causality, cause and effect, things external to the effect, making the effect. So we think like that. So when we start to try to comprehend the nature of the creator, we don't have a sufficient knowledge, we don't have the perception of this, therefore we have to suspend our capacity. However, just because we cannot comprehend totality of the nature of the creator and what it means, what the creator was doing before time or before the universe, then that doesn't necessarily mean, or it's nowhere an argument against the existence of a creator. Yeah, so it doesn't. It's just. Look, I had a few years ago. I had a debate with an atheist, and this atheist said, "Well, what caused God to think about why to create the universe?" And so I took a pen, I threw it in the middle of the room. Yeah, it was in a formal debate, and I said to him, "I said, why did I do that?" And he looked at me and goes, "I don't know." I go, "Well, if you don't know the reasons behind the actions of a human being, how are you going to know the reasons behind the actions of the creator? Yeah, how are you going to really comprehend this and understand the nature of this? Yeah, so yeah, I can come to the conclusion that there may be there is a reason, but what the specific reason is, what was occurring, all of these such things is, it's relatively, there's only so much we can comprehend on that. I don't know if Jake wants to add anything.
I wanted to say that it doesn't seem to be a logical problem. So it just seems to be saying that you can't conceive of it, or maybe you can. So it just doesn't seem like it's a logical question that poses an intellectual challenge. It just seems like I don't know what that's like, right? But then you arrived at this point of God's changelessness and God's and the necessity of God through a necessary and sound line of reasoning. So there are going to be these aspects. Obviously, no one is saying that you're going to understand everything about the source, but you arrived at the source through a necessary and sound line of reasoning. And the problem that you seem to be describing, if I'm understanding it correctly, just seems to be like just a problem of just a lack of understanding. We just can't conceive of it, but it doesn't seem to be like intellectually challenging.
Yeah, well,
I think all he's saying, I think all he's saying is, if there was nothing, if God didn't create anything before the universe, was he just doing nothing? He wasn't doing anything.
Yeah,
I think
that's
the only question. I don't see anything wrong with saying, well, yeah, he was idle. He wasn't doing anything. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, that's my intuitive understanding of it. But the way I see it also is that God has knowledge of himself, and then there is the for the initiation of the creation to happen. I don't know. I'm just saying, for the initiation of the creation to happen, there has to be the decision making. So, and all of these things are things that they are like actions. If I'm allowed to say, they are actions in a way, and I can't perceive of an action happening outside of time.
Yeah, that's a secondary issue. I mean, the first thing that you mainly were asking about is, well, what was God doing? I mean, I don't see any problem why what an atheist would object to God not doing anything without creation. I don't see any logical problem with that. So
yeah, what I'm saying is that if it's not doing anything, then that means it's okay. We don't have to invoke time because there is no action. But so long as there is an action, for instance, his knowledge of himself and the initiation of the creation, the decision before the initiation of the creation, things like that, they tend to have something to do with time, in my understanding.
Yeah, but when see, this is the thing, isn't it? Is that it comes down to how we define time.
What I'm saying is that it might be the problem might be it has to have something with my own perception of time.
Yeah, because as human beings, look, it depends how we define time. If we define time as some sort of change, then I don't think there's any logical problem in saying that. Well, the creator made a choice to create, and that's some sort of change. Imam Ghazali gives the argument about how the intentionality was from pre-eternal. This is his argument that he uses. That other people use other arguments and say, well, the only argument against change for the creator, choosing to create, is this argument that because the creator's perfect, then how could he go from perfection to some, how can he change, because change implies imperfection. But as various philosophers have argued, and including Muslims, is that change doesn't necessarily mean you're going from less perfect to more perfect, or perfection to imperfection. It can just mean perfection to perfection. Yeah, so there's no logical problem for that to occur. These are relatively speculative issues now, because we're going into trying to understand the nature of the creator. I think what you need to do is you need to bring this back to a rational discussion with your friend and say, look, what do we sense of the universe? These are the things that we sense of the universe. This is the most reasonable, logical conclusion that we can have in terms of how limited contingent things exist. That there's a necessity of a creator that has will, intentionality. That we have other issues with regards to where does the will come from? Where does consciousness come from? Can this be grounded upon the material, non-conscious world, non-conscious reality, or does it have to be grounded upon something that's already conscious? All of these things indicate pretty clearly, the inevitable conclusion that there needs to be a creator, needs to be God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that exists. So I think we need to get the discussion back into the reality. Whatever contentions that he may have, you can demonstrate that it's not a logical contradiction, it's a possibility. So God could change by not creating to creating, but doesn't imply imperfection. So you could mention these things as well. I know historically from the classical scholars, they were very wary of using the word change, and applying it to God, because change implied some sort of causal relationship, or imperfection to perfection, or perfection to imperfection. So they would avoid using that word.
All right, then.
I think we're gonna have to let you go, brother, because we got a couple other people waiting.
Thank you very much. I even had to take a break from my iftar.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
You better go.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. So we've got another 4 people in the back. Can I just ask, are any of the ones that are waiting deists?
No, they're not.
None of them.
No.
There was someone called
We've got full Muslims. Khalilallah has been waiting for a while, so we'll bring him on. But then the other 3 are Muslims as well.
You don't have to.
All right, see you later.
No, bring him on.
No joking.
Assalamu alaikum, guys. What's going on?
Walaikum salam.
How you doing, bro? Captain Mighty Beard.
Doing all right. Yeah, I sitting upstairs because the family's downstairs eating lunch, so I'm like, I'm gonna stay away from food for right now.
Angels pray for you, bro. If you
right.
How long have you got till iftar?
So it's 2:00 in the afternoon right now.
6 hours.
6.5 hours. 6 hours and 32 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, because it goes longer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Onto that. How have you been finding anyway the fasting and?
It's really easy at this point. Like we're halfway through it and
20 days through it, bro. 2/3.
So Khalil, these are the last 10 days of Ramadan. The last 10 nights. The last 10 nights are meant to be the most special nights of Ramadan. And one of the nights of Ramadan, we don't know exactly which one it is, but it's more likely in the last 10 nights. One of the nights is known as Laylatul Qadr, which means the night of power. And in this, the act of worship is considered like, 80 odd years, 1,000 months. How many years is that? Is that 88 years? So one night of worship, you can get the equivalent of 88 years of worship in one of these nights.
Wow. Okay.
And it's more likely in the last 10. It's more likely in the odd nights as well. The odd, so 21, 23, 25, 27, and 29.
So we don't know which night it is?
Because if you knew which night it was, then what would happen is just people would just say, we'll just do that one.
Yeah, right.
Whereas it gives us that desire to keep looking for it. Yeah.
And the whole 10 days, like as a whole, have their value as well. So the last 10 days are special as a whole, but there's one night that's just really special.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, can it be different for other people, or is it just one random night that we don't know about is special for everybody?
It'll be one night for the 24 hours of the Earth, isn't it? So
Okay.
it'll be that particular day.
So what I'm asking
but
is,
different time zones.
Is the 24 hours, could that be a different 24 hours for you than it is for me? Like, could it be a Wednesday for you and a Friday for me?
No. It'll be the same.
So for everybody, there's one night that we can get a lot of worship in. 83
years worth. I think somebody said in the comment it's 83 years. 83 years worth of worship. 1,000 months.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. How do you find the discussion anyway? Sorry, it was a bit of a distraction.
It was cool. With my discussions with you guys and my conversion, I was a deist for like 2 days until you guys were just like, nope. So the discussions that I've had with a lot of people, as I was an atheist with my YouTube channel, there were some deists that still prayed, that still believed in an afterlife, that still believed in some kind of like karma or sin. And I didn't know if you guys had any, any discussions that you wanted to have over why a deist would do these things if the deity itself has washed its hands and walked away from creation. Like, why would we pray?
Yeah, because the thing here with that sort of idea is that it introduces the notion that this God is interested.
Mm-hmm.
If there's such thing as sins and things like that, then why draw the line at creation? And then, I'm not going to bother now until Judgment Day or till the end of day. Like, what would be the point in that? And then it also introduced this notion of injustice, in that this deist God would create us, not bother to give us any guidance, yet hold us accountable for not knowing what was the right path.
Mm.
Also, Khalil, is that there are different versions of deism. Deism is not like just one particular view. So one form of deism believes that is a very universalist approach, by the way. So, a lot of the deists historically, some of them in the early period were universalists. They believed all religions went to the same path because they said human beings have this innate desire to have certain core ideas. One of those core ideas was like the belief in one God, the belief in, doing good and piety, the belief in the hereafter, the belief in heaven and hell. They said that, well, that's all human beings have. They don't need revelation because they already know it. Now, obviously, as Muslims, we believe, well, you do need revelation because you do need revelation to substantiate heaven and hell. It's not just something that, we can come to just on a rational basis. But this is what some of the classical deists believed in. So they believed in doing acts of worship, just that they didn't need revelation to tell them how to do it. So long as they were just generally, quote unquote, good, then that was sufficient for them. Yeah.
Yeah, but without that grounding, what is good?
Exactly.
Yeah,
This is the
problem.
Yeah, and this is, I think, what it is that a lot of people, when it comes to the issue of morality, a lot of people think that morality is clear-cut, obvious. We can all come to it in our minds. But those in the 18th century, if they were to come to the 21st century, they'd be thinking we're completely immoral, crazy people. Whereas at the time in the 18th century, they said, well, this is normal, what we're doing. And similarly, we'd probably look at them and think they were crazy as well in terms of their moral outlooks as well. So it just shows you the relative nature and the subjective nature of morality, certainly in the particulars, even if it's not necessarily in the generality. But I think as a final point is that, for yourself, Khalil, what is it, in your own mind, did it really make sense that you come to a conclusion that there is a creator that exists, that has will, and that just, it doesn't really matter that the creator just thought, oh.
I think it was a rock that I was stepping on while transversing to the other side of the pond. So it was just like, I'll sit right here for now, but I think this is going to sink pretty soon.
Yeah. I think it's what Abdulrahman said earlier, is that intuitively, we just does not make any sense, deism. No. Just from a basic, from your gut, you're thinking, well, if there's this unlimited, infinite creator, that chose to create, Yeah, I want to know what my purpose is. I want to know what's going on, why I was created.
Yeah, I don't want it to seem like insulting to anybody because I'm not trying to. But sometimes I think deism can be used as like a scapegoat, as a way to get away. Yeah, a cop out from like getting philosophically handled as an atheist. Like you can fall back into this deistic position to where you're like, okay, well, now I don't have these problems that I did as an atheist, but I still don't have to change anything about my life.
Yeah,
I can still just be who I am and do what I do, and not, still have nothing that I'm accountable for, or that I have to live under, because yeah, okay, cool, the universe was created and then he walked away and now I can just do whatever I want to. So no, I'm out of all these problems, but I still think there's that intuitive notion in the back of your mind that it just doesn't seem right.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree 100%. And I think the other thing is that part of that desire of seeking truth and seeking purpose is this desire to understand, what is it all about? How do I act? How do I function? How do I form relationships with other people? And so it's natural that, we are looking, whether you're atheist or secular or Muslim, you're looking for guidance, isn't it? You're looking for something which has greater meaning, for ourselves, and certainly how to live our lives. And certainly deism doesn't necessarily solve that problem. It just answers a particular question, but then, you're still trying to work out, well, how do I live my life? Whereas, with understanding revelation and understanding that actually the Creator is telling you the best way, it just becomes more intuitive, because then it grounds your purpose, it grounds your morality. You now got something that has some sort of firm anchoring, and it's not just me trying to make it up in my own head, trying to give some sort of meaning to people. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, if you guys want to take me out, I don't have much to add to this conversation. I mean, you guys have already got me on your side, so I don't think we could keep going with you. Basically, answer my questions.
No problem. Jazakallah khair anyway. Appreciate you coming on, Khalil, and showing the support.
I'll see you brothers later.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
So we're 2 hours and 12 minutes into this. How long are we wanting to stay on the stream for?
How many more guests have we got?
Well, we got iftar coming up, so let's just. The guys have been waiting, but let's just get them. Let's just get them on and keep it as brief as we can.
All right, so I'm just gonna...
yeah, I mean, we've got 5 people waiting. There's no way.
We'll rush through them. Don't worry, we'll rush through.
Right, so
okay.
Then, all right. The thing is there's Karen's back, and we did this to him last time, and he's not going to be happy.
Oh, and Karen is like the last one on the list. He's not going to be happy.
Oh, he's the last one. Okay then, but we'll try the others anyway. We'll try and go through the list, isn't it?
Assalamu alaikum, Abu Muhammed Ali.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How you guys doing?
Brother. Alhamdulillah. How are you, man?
Alhamdulillah. I'm going to make it short since you guys need to get out of here. I have a couple of questions. I'm just going to pick the main ones. Okay. You guys mentioned that we should expect that God should care at least for his creations. So some of the deists might say that if God cared for his creations, which would imply that either God is lacking something or isn't self-sufficient. How will you guys respond to that? Because caring implies that you're lacking something.
No, so the care doesn't imply a need. So I can have a purpose that is not necessarily the result that doesn't necessarily result from a need that I have. So God doesn't have a need for creation. God having a purpose for creation is not synonymous with God having a need for creation. Those are two different things.
Okay, that makes sense. Can I ask one last question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so there's nothing binding on God. We both would agree on that, right? That he should do this, correct? Yeah. Okay. If there's nothing binding on God, so it doesn't require him to send us a revelation. So why should we expect that he should send us a revelation?
Because he's good, and it's the good thing to expect. to guide the creatures that you created. If you can arrive at God's goodness, God's supreme wisdom rationally, then it kind of follows that if you are to be held accountable, he should give you revelation that would guide you and help you achieve the purpose he created you for.
I think
But
also Abu
when you
Muhammad
said,
as well, just so really quickly, Abu Muhammad as well, is
Mhm.
that sometimes we try to look at this from, okay, the creator down to creation. From creation, we can understand that we desire moral goodness, we desire to satisfy our instinct, our religiosity, our desire to worship. These are things that we desire to do. So if we desire to do this, then naturally we're going to start to ask the question, you know, is there a message? Where is this message? Should I expect a message? And it's from that that you would come to the conclusion, you would come across, or you would seek to come across Islam and the message of the Quran. Now, going into the discussion about does God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, have necessity to give his revelation or not? That's a separate point, because if you've got the revelation before you and you've got good reasons to believe that the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's it, khalas. We've got the answer now, isn't it? Yeah?
yes,
Did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decide to give his... Yes, of course. Why did I push myself to look for it? Because I have this God-given attribute of desiring to worship, desiring to form this relationship with this creator. So therefore I'm looking for a communication from the creator. So from my perspective, I'm pushing myself out there. I find the Quran, I investigate the Quran like I investigate other claims. I find there's good rational reasons to believe the Quran is the divine word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore I have now answered the question. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was definitively and by necessity gave us the revelation because of the existence of the Quran.
okay. Just to pick back on what Abdulrahman mentioned, he said because God is good. Isn't that implying that you're judging God by a standard?
You mean I'm judging God? No, God is good. His nature is good. I'm not judging him by a standard that is external to himself. If God, his own nature is good, then it follows that he can't contradict his own nature. And I just want to say one last thing. I know we're really rushing and I'm so tired. But the thing here is about, you don't need to establish the necessity of revelation. So we can make a case now, and a strong case, for why revelation is actually necessary. And it actually follows that revelation is needed, not necessary, but very likely, even, right? But
compelling.
Even compelling. But even if it's just possible, it's the point here is that we have access to claimed revelations, and we can assess them and come to the conclusion that they're true. I mean, it's not like we just believe them. It's not like we come to the conclusion that it's possible or it's likely that God is going to give us revelation, and then we just believe the first revelation we come across. No. Aside from the fact that it's likely or whether God needs to do it, we have access to revelation, and we have evidence that this revelation is of God. That's the only way. That's the only justifiable way you can believe in revelation. You can't just believe in it just on the mere fact that God should give you revelation.
Okay. So just to piggyback on what you just mentioned, would it be better to start out with the possibility? It's possible that God could send us a revelation. It's possible that God couldn't send us a revelation. Just some people claim they receive revelation, so that gives us a gateway to investigate into the claim. Then from there we can. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So the fact that you have revelations out there, that's already like, okay, let me investigate the claims. But then the first part of the question is a bit complicated. It's going to depend on the kind of deist. Some deists who do believe in an afterlife and stuff like that, they would. Some of them might fall in the category of like the people who never got exposed to revelation, and they'll have their own test in the hereafter, because some of them would have the approach that, hey, I haven't been presented with evidence. And we know that category of people, if they truly didn't have access to the truth, then they will have their own form of like a test in the hereafter. Okay. But yeah, I mean, generally, yes, there are revelations, there are claimed revelations out there. So it's kind of simple. Just assess their truth value.
Yeah, okay, I think it's more than so. Abu Muhammad, you're having lots of questions now.
No, just one. I get you guys.
That was about 5 or 6. Yeah. But I think the issue is it's more than just possibility. It's compelling to the mind. It's compelling to us as human beings that we would expect revelation. We would expect some things, and all those arguments that argue against the impossibility fall foul. Particularly the argument that miracles cannot occur because it breaks the laws, and this is logical impossibility. As we had a stream on this, and Jake's mentioned it. That's not sufficient as an argument to demonstrate that it's impossible for special revelation to be sent down to human beings.
Yeah. Abu, do you have another question?
Yeah, let me just finish it.
All right, that's it. You're out of here, man.
Okay. Why should God use select one person among people to send his revelation where he could have revealed to each person individually?
That's a
Does that
different
make sense?
question, to be honest.
He could have revealed. You mean sent a revelation like
For example,
but in a sense he did. Okay, so there are different types of revelations. So we have that. We have the access to the God's signs in the universe. You can say that's an aspect of God's
Revealing.
revelation as well,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And he gave us that other general revelation that is meant for all of mankind, that guides our affairs and stuff like that. And you need to have that objective source, or else every person can come up and say, God revealed this to me, God revealed that to me. And we know through experience that it's not like everybody has the same experience of God. So again, it's not a question of whether he could have. Maybe it's conceivable that he could have, but it's quite evident that he didn't, because everybody has a different understanding of morality and stuff like that. But there is the directly accessible for each person. We have the fitrah, right? And it's directly whatever your understanding of the fitrah is, but it is a direct access or a direct inclination towards God. And we have God's signs in the universe, and we have a revelation that's given to his selected prophets.
Yeah,
Okay.
Act as role models as well. So
and one thing to sort of add
that
to
does
that
make
as well.
sense, a lot of sense. The problem really I had with individual revelation is that, let's say if Hitler claimed he had a revelation from God and he was commanded to be killing everyone,
yeah,
then
precisely.
you couldn't really argue against him,
Yeah, and also the notion of prophethood is intrinsically connected to the idea of a great character. So in order to have collective revelation, you'd have to have like a whole civilization of amazing people, which is just not very likely if they're all.
They'd all have to be ma'asum, innit? To a certain extent, infallible or unable to commit major mistakes, major haram. So you'd suddenly just have robots, angels.
Yeah.
Okay.
And where would the test then
man,
be?
you guys been great, man. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, good, man. We love
Thanks
you too,
a lot,
Abu
bro.
Muhammad.
All right, brother. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu
Take care,
alaikum
bro.
wa
Assalamu
rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right, so we're gonna leave it there, because there is no other guests. The ones that were there have gone. So two things I wanted to mention before we end the stream. So Brother Khalil has mentioned as well that he's got a stream happening next week. Is it? When is it? He said here with Dr. Shoaib next Saturday at 12 Eastern. Is that 12 a.m.?
No, 12 p.m.
12 a.m. p.m. You're on.
Oh,
Khalil.
yeah. It's 12 p.m.
12 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, 12 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to be having a conversation with Dr. Shoaib over Islam. He wrote a book that's actually got published, I think, through Routledge. Wrote a book over Islam and evolution. And we're going to be having a conversation about that.
Okay, inshallah. So make sure to join that on the EA show, formerly the Empathetic Atheist, now the Exploring Arguments show. So just brought you on to mention that. Salam.
All right, cool. Thank you. See you guys.
Assalamu alaikum. Take care.
And last of all, if you're leaving this stream, please do head over to the Sapiens Institute, who are currently live now. I've put the link in the chat. So make sure to click that and head over there and continue. They've only just started live streaming about 20 minutes or so ago.
Yusuf, before you close it too, two quick things. One, I want to say thank you to everybody who's been watching and subscribed to our channel, because we just hit 2K subscribers on YouTube.
Allahu Akbar. Takbir.
Allahu Akbar.
Yeah. So, because we forgot to mention that at the beginning of the show, we hit it sometime after the on Raw stream. Second thing is here that I've been going back and forth with Arn Ra on Facebook, And I just want to read out his most recent comment here for people to see what's going on. He said, as I've already said so many times now, it was always my opinion that it was impossible for there to be absolutely nothing. But in science, uneducated opinions do not counter that of experts, saying that he has an uneducated opinion. He's not an expert. I remember that cosmologists say that it is impossible, that it is possible for there to be absolutely nothing instead of something. So my humble opinion doesn't matter. I told y'all I don't study philosophy or cosmology, so it doesn't reflect well on you insisting that we talk about those things anyway instead of something I know.
Why did he not say that?
Hold on. Listen to this last sentence. Because that means that my opinion is worthless, and all I can do is defer to experts in that field. So I responded by saying this. Okay, thank you for your response, Arn. Since our discussion was and would be philosophical the second time around, does this mean that you aren't interested in coming back on for a part 2? Because look, we didn't try to trick him into this and say, hey, Arn, we're going to be talking about science and evolution. And then all of a sudden we flip the philosophical switch on him. I mean, that's the first thing. And the second thing is the question of whether there is such a thing as a necessary being is a metaphysical and philosophical question. Yeah. So after you have, and I'm sorry to say this so bluntly, but after you've kind of embarrassed yourself on the last stream, don't try to push it on us as if we did something wrong. And, why are you guys still insisting on this? Dude, that was the whole point of the conversation. No. I mean,
and he was so philosophically confident in the discussion.
Can I say something? If this is ridiculous, because if you say that you're not concerned with philosophy, it's not your area, yet you're making definitive philosophical claims. That's inconsistent. So in the beginning of the stream, he made his stance very clear on the existence of the necessary being, that it is not possible, right? He said that the existence of God is not a possibility several times. Yeah. Whatever variation of that he mentioned, he made that positive claim and he was backing it up and defending it. That's a philosophical claim. So I think you should realize that you're being inconsistent here. And I mentioned this in the stream, that you're holding yourself by the same standard you're asking for, because when theists talk about stuff that you say they're just making it up and they have no idea what they're talking about, well, by your admission, philosophy isn't your area, so why are you making philosophical claims? And the thing about science is, if you're going to address the existence of God through science, or even the validity of religion through science, that's not entirely a scientific exercise. If you're going to talk about God through science, that's philosophy. Science is involved, but it's still philosophy. You can't address the question of God as it relates to science from a purely scientific perspective. That's impossible. Even if you're going to talk specifically just about scripture and its validity, well, I'm not sure that you're an expert on the Bible or the Quran for you to do that. So that doesn't seem to be your area either. So I just don't get it. Your entire career seems to be based on something that, like, with respect, I'm not trying to pick on him, you're not an expert in, because you're not an expert in philosophy, you're not an expert in theology.
He's doing a Quran reading,
so you should just talk about the hard sciences. Don't relate it to God. That's a philosophical shift.
He's doing a reading of the Quran. He's doing Tafsir al-Aran Ra, and he's an absolute nincompoop about the whole thing. Like he's not studied it. Like he's imposing assumptions when it comes to a certain. So the guy.
Listen, the guy. Okay,
I'm going to stop you there. Because otherwise, we're going to do. We'll do another stream.
We don't want to disrespect him. Again, we want to repeat that on the stream, I appreciated Ron and I appreciated the way he carried himself and his approach to the conversation, and I enjoyed having him on. This is just we're just dealing with the substance here, and I don't want it to get personal. So
let's save this for a stream. Where we note down everything that we've been talking about here, and we deal with it in the best way possible. But we're 2 hours 30 minutes into this now, and I am conscious that we need to end it. So we will leave it there for today. I'm not even going to ask anyone for closing statements out of risk of us talking for another 10 hours. And I think we've covered pretty much everything we need to cover. So Jazakallah khair to everyone who's been watching today. If you haven't already, please remember to subscribe, to give us a like, because that helps with the algorithms, and comment if you're not watching this live in the comment section, whether you like it or not, give your opinions, etc. All of this helps the show in general. And also share on your Facebook and all your other social medias, Twitter, etc., so that other people can be exposed to the channel and possibly lead to more subscribers. Thank you again to the 2,000 of you plus who have already subscribed. We are also on, we have podcasts on things like, what was it now? Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, so on. If there's a major podcast platform, inshallah, we should be on there. And if we've not, leave that in a comment and we'll try and sort that out so we are on there. And follow us on social media. So if you search TAP or Thought Adventure Podcast in Facebook and Instagram, you should find us there. And this is the Twitter handle. So make sure to follow us on Twitter if you haven't already as well. But other than that, thank you to everyone who's been watching today and who's joined the stream. May Allah bless you all. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks, inshallah, with another podcast. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And remember to head over to Sapiens Institute. Link in the comment section. Assalamu alaikum again. Oh, my thing's popped out.